Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Zia,
I'm Chris Luciano.
and today, this is Cinema Sideshow with Geek Tank, because we don't have a better name for it, so hopefully that works. So, Chris, this was an idea that you had, so I guess we'll sort of call this your segment. How did you come up with this idea?
Well, I think the main thing is that we've all seen movies that somebody else hasn't seen, or we all want to see movies that nobody has seen. So my roommate and I came up with this idea. My shout out to Frank Volk here, where he and I for movie night, because we were roommates, he'd pick a movie, I'd pick a movie, both movies that we haven't seen, and we'd watch one, we'd sit and discuss for a little bit, then we'd put on the second one. And usually we had a theme around these movie nights, but it was just to see movies that we weren't exposed to and movies that we wanted to see but just never got around to it.
So, ideally, both people have not seen the movie.
Ideally, but sometimes it's just like, oh, you need to see this movie. It's a must-see.
Okay. And there's really no restrictions. It could just be a terrible movie, and you're just watching it for shits and giggles.
Yeah, one of our movie nights was The Room, if I remember. It was The Room, and it was
geez.
Samurai Cop. Have you seen Samurai Cop?
Oh, and I've seen bits and pieces of it, but that's the same thing with The Room. I've only watched the highlights, and I don't think I'd be able to sit through the whole movie.
No, Samurai Cop and The Room are very funny. You should be able to
They're
see this.
funny, yeah, but it's
In the wrong one.
Or is it the right way?
I'm pretty sure the director's intention was not for it to be comedic.
Well, I think maybe now he does, just because he knows. He's like,
It was just a master stroke. I wanted
let me play this up. But this week, the movie was it was one you've seen before, and that you've been wanting me to watch for a long time. And I think now I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. I can say I have seen an Ingmar Bergman film. Have you?
I think like 90% of the population would say no right there.
What the fuck are you talking about? We keep hearing about this Ingmar Bergman guy all the time. So who is he? Who is he, Chris?
You want me to jump in here?
Yeah, explain. Tell them who Ingmar Bergman is.
Ingmar Bergman is, I guess you could just best describe him as a director's director. He's the director that if you ask even most directors working today, you know, who is among their favorite directors, he might not be number one, but he's definitely one of the directors that he's going to be on almost every single list of every other director.
So basically, like somewhere in their top 10.
Mostly, depending on who is being asked, but okay. Definitely. And Swedish director. Most of his film hits came between 1950 and 1974, 1980, somewhere around that range. That was his era, and the era, along with Hitchcock and Kubrick, that his work really dominated the public sphere.
So basically, the reason why people wouldn't know about him is because he's an older director, and you kind of have to have an interest in film history more so than just, what's currently hitting the theaters.
Well, I think most people, and this isn't critiquing most people, they try to stick with American films. They're kind of a little bit careful to shy away from any film that's not English speaking.
Right, because it's not as culturally relevant to them.
I would say so, definitely. And I think in that regard, he's mainly, most people that talk about Ingmar Bergman are like those high-class critics or directors, and that's not really the layman. But I think it's a shame because Ingmar Bergman, a lot of his films, even in this film, which we're going to talk about in a second, they just center around normal people. Doesn't matter, what culture you're from. It's more about the human experience itself.
So universality.
Correct.
All right. Well, on that note, let's kind of jump in to Wild Strawberries because I didn't know what to expect from it. I didn't know because you were painting Bergman as this grand, awesome director, and I guess I had higher expectations going in, but I did enjoy the movie quite a bit. The synopsis sounded a little boring because it's like you said, it's just normal people kind of going about their lives, and they just encounter relatively mundane, normal things. But it was an interesting movie, and I saw a lot of things in there that I was already familiar with from Jungian psychology and whatnot, dream analysis sort of thing. So Oh, I think I forgot. I just lost my train of thought, everyone.
Yeah,
But,
you should go into Jungian psychology for people that actually don't know.
the Jungian psychology. So let's talk about the plot a little bit. It's about this old doctor, and he starts having dreams as he's getting older in life, and it starts alarming him, right?
Yes.
That basically maybe he's lived his life wrong up until this point. He's focused on work and kind of kept a distance from his personal relations, his relationships with people. And it's just about his journey of kind of rethinking this way of life. And you see him develop from sort of this cold, distant man to trying to reconnect with others as he's getting nearer to death. The Jungian psychology comes in where he's having these dreams that are symbolic of what's really going on beneath the surface of his conscious mind, making him reevaluate his life decisions and taking grasp of what time is left to correct that course, and find out what's really important to him. And Jungian psychology was big with that, with dream analysis, looking at your dreams, keeping a journal of your dreams, looking at the symbolism, because Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, believed that dreams are like mythology, and you'll find a lot of symbols in there that are universal. Things like the cross, which shows up all over the world. It's also the Egyptian ankh, cross, ankh, same thing, meaning life. Or any mythological symbols as well. So for me, the movie was fun in seeing these dream sequences when they're trying to introduce all these different symbols and not necessarily tell you exactly what it is, but you're trying to piece it together as you find out more about this guy and how he's lived his life and the people he's around. So, yeah.
So, quick thoughts about, we can talk about several aspects of the film. Directing, acting, script, the way it's edited. Want to jump in? You want me to jump in?
You go ahead and jump in.
Well, I think for the most part, most of Ingmar Bergman's films have good acting, and I think the reason behind that is the actors that he worked with in his movies are actually the same actors he worked with when he was producing theater plays. Mm-hmm. So he knew them really well. He knew what roles they were really good for. And I think he had a better relationship with his actors, which always helps. You don't want to be that asshole director that you have to
like
force.
Kubrick.
Well, Kubrick forced the best out of his actors.
Well, yeah, he psychologically abused them too. I mean, the final product is good.
You think it's worth it for art, though? For art's sake?
It depends on the person. For some people, it is worth it. For others, it isn't. I mean, I've gone to big lengths when writing things. I mean, you lose yourself in characters, so I can understand it, but it's also detrimental in some ways.
What did you think about the acting, though, in general?
I thought it was good acting for the most part, down to earth. I remember thinking some of the characters felt kind of silly. I remember Sarah, or Sarah as they call her in the movie, but thinking that was a little bit overacted. But different time, so I was willing to let it go.
Yeah. The funny thing is, the main guy is actually a famous director himself. He's not actually an actor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was actually pretty happy with his acting. He was believable.
Yeah. But okay, they're directing. I don't know about you, but I mean, I was watching Wild Strawberries right before we went to do this little show here, and I think it made me appreciate, now that I've seen so many Bergman films, and Wild Strawberries I think was the second or third Bergman film I actually watched, just going back and just being like, masterclass directing. A lot different from nowadays directors that like to cut a lot. Bergman sort of just, I don't know if you noticed that when you were watching it.
Yeah, like the slower shots, kind of taking everything in rather than just, cut. Yeah,
it's a very characteristic thing of older directors. They didn't have to cut so much because they didn't have to really meet a deadline, so they were just willing to put the camera on people and just let them act.
I mean, it was a relatively short film, so I mean, it didn't feel like it was drawn. Or are you just talking about in?
No, I just like the way it's directed, where he just sort of lets them act and he doesn't keep cutting back and forth.
Okay, yeah, I get, getting it all in one shot.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that was I definitely appreciate those longer shots like that, where it's not constant cut and then bring on another person or like I think we talk about it a lot with fight scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they have the one takes. I like those a lot. Those are cool. So, in that sense, yeah, I guess that was something I didn't really think about before, but I enjoyed about the movie. Other than that, like I don't usually pay too much attention to cinematography unless they've got cool shots going on with like a mirror and then you see things in the background. Those things I take notice of, but I didn't see any of that in this. So.
Well, the one thing is, I was just watching it, and he does landscapes. Well, not landscapes, but he likes to focus, particularly in this movie, a lot on the trees and the way that the leaves move, which I thought was pretty good. There was a couple shots there's one with it was in one of the dream sequences where the main character is walking with a doctor, and they're actually showing his reflection on the pond before they pan up to actually show the two characters talking, which I thought was pretty nice. But this is pretty standard stuff, for the most part.
So, what about themes?
You could jump in. You probably know more about me in that regard.
I mean, as a whole, I liked the existential themes it tackled. Like I said before, it's about an older man that's kind of reevaluating his life. It was very worldly and down to earth, and not in a bad way at all. Not in a depressing sense. There's some sad things in the movie because, of course, life sometimes has its ups and downs. But it has a message, I think, overall that is something anyone can take something from. That is to appreciate the people around you, the relationships, to prioritize what's really important to you. Because, again, you have the case of a character that's prioritized work over everything. So, his wife hated him. His son grew up to be just like him. And, his son is having marital problems, yada, yada, yada. And just, I like those. I liked those themes that it tackled about what's really important in life.
Yeah, I would agree with you. The mortality thing, I mean, I don't think it's that people are afraid to do it. I just think that good examples of mortality and regretting your past decisions, it's hard to think of good examples, and I think Wild Strawberries is a good example of doing, making up for your past sins very well and keeping it down to earth.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, because I don't think people are afraid to tackle those themes. I think they just do it in a very overly dramatic way.
Yeah.
Whereas, again, you said this was very down to earth. It's relatable, it's like something that would happen to you as a normal person going throughout your life, the sorts of situations you would tackle, a lost love or, an unhappy marriage. Like, these things are common and you see it a lot. So in that sense, a lot of people can relate to it.
Yeah. I think that's a great strength of Bergman as a director. He's one of those directors that takes what he's feeling and he kind of just makes a movie out of it. He goes, in this one in Seventh Seal, which is the movie he actually directed before this movie, it all has to do with death because he was fighting stomach cancer at the time, and he wasn't sure whether he was actually going to...
Bergman was fighting stomach cancer? Okay. So not the character in the movie?
No.
Okay.
So he was fighting stomach cancer, and he wasn't sure whether he was going to live or die. So I think these two movies back to back, Seventh Seal, which is also a very good movie, and Wild Strawberries, where he just really dives in and he tackles the theme of mortality. Though they're different in their execution. Seventh Seal is more of where death is an unescapable truth, no matter what you do. And Wild Strawberries is, you're accepting your death because you realize it's going to happen, but you're trying to right your previous sins. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But
Redemption.
There's a couple other themes that I particularly liked. I liked how the memories were a reflection of what was actually happening in his life now, because one thing that was really interesting was that is 50 years too much for spoiler alert, just in case people actually want to watch the movie?
Spoiler alert. You have 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3,
2, 1 was in one of his memory sequences when they're redoing his ex-fiance's memories, which was Sarah. And immediately when they cut back to the real world, you have a girl who enters their car because their car broke down, and 2 other guys, and that's symbolic of the relationship that he had with Sarah when he was younger. I thought that was pretty cool, and it's not done in a really haphazard manner.
Oh, see, I didn't even notice that. That was very subtle. I didn't notice it. I mean, in a sense, that's a good thing because I was so invested in learning more about the character, his life, and all of that. So,
Yeah.
Look, you know this already. I don't watch as much film as you or Kay. It would be better if you two were talking about this, but I'm more of a reader and gamer.
Yeah, you got to show this. Well, you got the DVD now. You could just give it to Kay and get his thoughts.
I tried. He doesn't want to watch it.
Why?
I don't care about Ingmar Bergman.
Yeah, truth hurts. I think I bashed you enough for 4 years that you finished like one film. I could just like forget about it for a second.
Yeah, I'm not the film buff. So I like films. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not the film buff.
But as the guy who's really interested in psychology, this seemed more up your alley. Because I don't know what other.
No, it was up my alley.
What other movies you seen that really tackle like these, deeper issues besides maybe Blade Runner 2049?
I mean, there's a lot that tackle the issues. I can't think of one that tackled Jungian psychology in this way, though. I can't think of one. It's possible I've seen one, though. Because this was very much... It feels like one of the cases that Carl Jung describes right out of Modern Man in Search of a Soul. Not as if, like, a particular case. It wasn't like Bergman read it and then just was like, oh, let me take this person's story and translate it to film. But in the sense of how Jung worked with his patients, it felt like the main character was treating himself as Jung would have treated one of his patients, in the sense that he is, journaling his dreams and evaluating them and trying to apply what he's taking from it to his actual life. Like, for instance, Jung gives the example in the book of one of his patients having a recurring dream about a runaway train. Okay. And I think something about high altitude. And, he's trying to relate this to his life. It's like, okay, he's constantly climbing up the ladder in his career. He's going too high, too fast. That's why there's a runaway train. He can't stop the locomotion. He can't breathe in the high altitude because he's going too high. He's past his comfort zone, and trying to take these lessons and give it to his patient to be like, hey, maybe slow down with your career, focus on some other things. Otherwise, you're gonna end up in a disaster. So in that sense, it was it did a very real life portrayal of Jungian psychology. I mean, as much as I paint myself to be, I'm not a Bergman expert, particularly his life. I'm more into his movies, but I wouldn't know whether he was actually read anything of the sort. But chances are he was familiar with it, because I want to say that Carl Jung would have been very popular during that time.
This was 57, I think.
It probably would have been really popular then. It still holds a place in the popular culture. I don't know, in regards to modern psychology, how much people are using dream analysis, because it seems like the modern psychology scene is a lot of pharmacology. They give you pills. Oh, you're depressed, here, take this. You're too hyper, take this. Things like that, as opposed to trying to understand someone's psyche and help them take what's there innately and use it to better their life. Sort of like finding your strengths and weaknesses and learning to adjust. Kind of like turning a dial. So it's like your dial is matching right with life.
You should. I just wanted to ask you. What did you think overall of, like? I don't think there's many dream sequences. Maybe the one that everybody remembers, at least from a cinematic history standpoint, is the one at the beginning with the carriage and the coffin and the clock and everything else. What did you think of the dream sequences as a whole in this movie, though? Because I particularly enjoyed them.
The first one was good. I mean, they were all good. The only one I thought was perhaps too much was the last one, I think, because it went on so long. That was the one where the doctor and the wife show up, and his deceased wife. That one I felt went too long, and it almost felt like it was explaining too much, whereas the rest of the movie was kind of letting you figure it out. And that was the one time that I thought it was like, okay, no, now you're kind of deviating from what you've already set up. But it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Like it probably sounds worse as I'm talking about it than it really was.
I think I agree with you in the sense that I actually really enjoyed the scene with his wife, because it just shows how detached he really was from his wife, that he didn't even notice that she was cheating on him. Spoiler. But I didn't really particularly like the examination room theme before that. Maybe I need to rewatch it a couple times.
Right. I think that was the big problem with it for me, was the examination room. I didn't mind so much finding out about his ex or his deceased wife having cheated on him. That part was fine, because it's like you're learning more about the character.
Yeah.
Whereas the examination room scene, it was kind of just like hammering it into you.
Yeah,
you know,
I agree with you. But overall, though, would you give it a recommendation if you're going to recommend this to somebody, or no?
Two particular people, I would recommend it. Go in with the expectation that it's not going to be like your typical blockbuster film nowadays. But despite it being about, the mundane, everyday life, I was interested. I surprisingly so, because I'm sitting there at first, I'm just kind of like, oh, it's a black and white movie. Oh, I got to read subtitles. And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm interested. And then slowly I'm getting more invested. And I was like, oh, okay, it's already over. That was good.
What about the script, though? But you already said that some of the lines seemed a little bit hokey, but did you enjoy the script for the most part?
For the most part, yeah. And the hokey part wasn't so much the script as it was the acting of certain characters.
Okay.
So it's a recommendation if you're okay with older films and you're not expecting something fast-paced. It's a good movie.
Yeah, I don't really, like I said, I think you would have handled it a lot better than other people, because I think most other people would probably fall asleep halfway through the film, but...
Well, that's the thing. I don't think it was that slow. It's just, I think nowadays, because of what the standard is for film, things are typically moving faster. There's more action. There's more spectacle. There's been a bar that's just been raised. I think if you look at anything post 2008, I think maybe Marvel's mostly responsible for it, that now we have these movies that are really about spectacle.
Yeah.
Which I don't have a problem with. I love spectacle in movies. But it has the detriment of making older films seem really slow by comparison, which is not exactly the case. They're not actually slow, but it might seem that way.
Yeah, and I think the lot of thing is you can cuts, I think, make things feel faster than they are, because it actually looks like things are actually happening when it could just be cutting back between you and I talking. But since there's so many cuts, your brain keeps
like as if I kept stopping it and then like putting it on your face.
Yeah, exactly.
His cut.
Yeah, but I mean, Bergman and a lot of older directors, not just Bergman. You watch Tarkovsky, even watch You haven't seen anything from Hitchcock, have you?
I think I've seen the original Psycho.
But besides that,
nope.
No, he just likes to leave the camera on. Like, directors of that time, they just like to leave the camera on and just let the actors do the work, which I got to say, it's probably a little bit more, you have to involve your actors a little bit more. They really have to digest it.
Now I'm wondering, though, are people really like that? Do they really enjoy the fast-paced, constant spectacle stuff? Because it seems like Hitchcock is still pretty popular, even in the mainstream. And he's known for those long shots, and they worked to great effect in that he created so much suspense.
Well, the thing is with Hitchcock, the general premises for his films, if I can just say this, again, not the biggest Hitchcock expert. He has like 80 films, and I've probably only seen about 9. So I'm not a Hitchcock expert by any stretch of the means, but generally his plots are actually really, like you said, it's a suspense, so action in a way. I mean, they're not action in the sense that it's fighting and a lot of action happening on the screen, but it's like a boiling point where it's just, you're just slowly increasing the tension, and so it becomes really, really entertaining, even if it's not directed, cut, and a lot of things are actually happening. So, I mean, I'd have to actually show you one of his films. That way you can get the point.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and give Wild Strawberries a recommend to everyone watching this, because I don't want to seem like I'm generalizing people and saying that they only enjoy spectacle or something like that. So, yeah. Watch old films, too, because you never know what you might like, if you don't already watch old films.
I was going to say, can I go a little bit more on Bergman here?
Oh, yeah, by all means.
The thing is with Bergman is, I already said this, he has 50-plus movies, which is just absurd. And like I said, Hitchcock also has 80 movies. So sometimes you're just like, where do I start with some of this? And I think that this movie and Seventh Seal, if you want to get into Bergman, are the best two places to start.
So Wild Strawberries and Seventh Seal.
Yeah, Seventh Seal is about it's probably one of the most famous images in cinema. It's Seventh Seal is about a knight who's just come back from the Crusades, and when he comes home to his home country, he's confronted on the shore by death, like actual death, like Grim Reaper death.
Skeleton and hood and scythe and all.
Well, not skeleton, but
okay.
It's a man playing him, but he's got the hood on, no scythe, but he's coming to kill him.
But basically, Angel of Death, Grim Reaper, whatever.
Yes. Okay. So he makes a deal with death. He goes, we're going to play chess. As long as I play chess, you can't kill me. If I win, you let me go free until it's my designated time. You don't kill me right now. And if you win, I die. And really, the thing that's interesting about the game is that the chess game is kind of ancillary. It just goes to show him trying to outwit death in the most practical manner possible by playing a chess game. Mm-hmm. But they'll play a couple moves, and it'll cut and it'll show what the knight's doing around town and how he's trying to get all of his affairs in order just in case he does lose, and how he's trying to what's the word I'm looking for here? He's trying to find some purpose in his life because he just went through a war, and he's still not religious. He's trying to find God during his last couple hours playing chess with death. So
Bergman tackling more of the existential dread.
Exactly. And this one actually came out a year before Wild Strawberries.
It kind of sounds more interesting to me than Wild Strawberries.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a little bit more hokey. I'd say that some of the
it is? Okay.
But it's not like supposed to be comedic, but I think it's still got that morbid tone, but it's more about him not finding God than anything else. And a lot of Bergman's later works deal with God specifically, because Bergman grew up a Catholic in Sweden, but really a lot of his films goes to show that he didn't really. He was. Yeah, don't worry about that. He was just.
Is there a fucking bird in here?
He was just struggling with this whole concept of God, and
I think everyone goes through that at some point in their lives, unless they're just blindly lying to themselves, like, "Oh, I believe." I think everyone has to go through that.
But if you're interested in watching the movies about Bergman that Bergman did about his relationship with God and how he wasn't a believer, there's a trilogy of movies by him. They're called the Silence of God trilogy, and they all deal with God in a different way. The first one's called Through a Glass Darkly. It's really about whether God is actually controlling your actions or not. So, predetermined fate and whatnot.
Right, determinism.
Winter Light, which is probably the best of the three, is about God's silence in your life. And the last one, which is called, appropriately, The Silence, is about God not existing in your life and you having to get on without him. And they're not trilogy in the sense that there's characters that are carried over, but thematically, they're all similar. So it's called the Silence of God trilogy.
Well, there was some of that in Wild Strawberries, too. There was the two young guys arguing about it. It was the pastor and the scientist, or a doctor or something like that they were constantly arguing. One was an atheist and one was, obviously he's a pastor, so he believes in God.
Well, that's imagine them arguing, and that's most of the premise for Winter Light and Seventh Seal. So if you're interested in more of God and less of, morbid mortality, those would be the two to recommend to people.
I like stuff like that. I like those topics. I like to play devil's advocate with people. So if like they're the staunch atheist, I'll play the guy that believes in God, and if they don't, then I'll be the opposite. The yin and yang thing. You can't have one without the other. So I like to fuck with people.
But I was going back to Bergman. Bergman made this movie immediately after Seventh Seal, and he made Seventh Seal after being bedridden for a long period of time. So obviously he was grappling whether he was actually going to live or die or not. And that's why I think that gave him the inspiration to make these two films, which if you ask anybody, they'd probably say Seventh Seal or Wild Strawberries are among his best movies. Me, personally, Persona is my favorite from a director standpoint, not particularly a script or thematic point of view, but from a director's perspective, it's absolutely fantastic. But I'd say those two are the jumping off points for Bergman. If you really want to get into it after you've seen one of his movies and you're like, I like what he's doing, watch the Silence of God trilogy, I would say, or you can watch Cries and Whispers, which is another one I think you might be interested in.
I'll think about checking it out.
It's actually not in black and white.
And then I can say I've seen 2 Ingmar Bergman films.
Once you get up to 3, you'll be good, man.
And then I can go around and ask everyone if they've seen an Ingmar Bergman film, right?
Hey, I wasn't just doing that. I was doing Tarkovsky.
Have you ever seen a Tarkovsky film?
But I just want to leave with some of other things that people have said about Bergman. Stanley Kubrick was probably the biggest Bergman fan.
Oh, you had the quote ready the whole time.
No, I didn't actually, but I was just reading this, and apparently it's true because it was a list they actually posted. Stanley Kubrick voted Wild Strawberries his second favorite movie of all time.
But what was his first favorite film?
I'll look it up.
Oh, man.
I'll look it
I
up.
thought you had it ready. You disappointed me.
But Stanley Kubrick, going back to it, was big Bergman fan and actually wrote a letter to him pretty much saying that you're the greatest.
He confessed his love to him.
Yeah, apparently.
And then said no hetero, bro.
But and I think that's you've only seen The Shining, right?
I think so. No, I think I've seen Eyes Wide Shut as well.
I need to see that one actually. I haven't seen that one.
See, here's the thing. I know I've seen The Shining in its entirety. I don't think I've ever seen Eyes Wide Shut in its entirety.
That's his last film,
movies used to come on TV, and I, put them on while they're there.
All right, so Stanley Kubrick's top 10 movies of all time, and let me know if you've actually seen any of these movies. I doubt you have, but we'll see.
All right.
Okay, so as we said. All right, so number 1, A Vitelloni by Federico Fellini.
No.
I haven't seen that one either, but I love Federico Fellini. He's a madman, I guess it's the only way I could put it. 2 Wild Strawberries. 3 Citizen Kane.
I know of Citizen Kane, but I haven't seen it.
4 Treasure of Sierra Madre.
No.
I actually know these movies. Come on, man. You're killing me here.
No. I told you, I'm not a film buff.
Okay, well, Treasure of Sierra Madre has Humphrey Bogart in it, and it's a Western.
That makes me more interested. I like Humphrey Bogart, and I like Westerns.
I need to show you Big Sleep.
Have you read it yet?
No, I haven't. I watched the movie.
But the books are better, man.
I probably agree with you for most of the part. City Lights.
No.
It's by Charlie Chaplin. It's 80 minutes. It's good. It's got one of the best boxing scenes ever.
But I haven't seen it. I'm probably not gonna have seen any of these movies.
Henry V by Olivier. I haven't actually seen that one.
Nope.
7 is La Notte by Antonini, which I saw recently. It's a movie about a wife and a husband quarreling. That's pretty much all it is. 8 is The Bank Dick, which is a comedy, actually, surprisingly. 9 is Roxy Hart, and 10 is Hell's Angels. Those are Stanley Kubrick's top 10 films of all time.
And I haven't seen a single one.
And here's the quote from Stanley Kubrick for Ingmar Bergman. All right, so he says, well, do they actually have the quote here or no? All right, so here it is. February 9th, 1960. Dear Mr. Bergman, you have most certainly received enough acclaim and success throughout the world to make this note quite unnecessary. But for whatever it's worth, I should like to add my praise and gratitude as a fellow director and for the unearthly and brilliant contribution you have to the world by your films. Your vision of life has moved me deeply, much more deeply than I have ever been moved by any other films. I believe you are the greatest filmmaker at work today. Beyond that, allow me to say you are unsurpassed by anyone in the creation of mood, atmosphere, subtlety of performance, avoidance of the obvious, and truthfulness and completeness of your characterizations. To this, one must also add everything else that goes into making a film. And I believe you are blessed with the most wonderful actors. So, Stanley Kubrick fanboying about Ingmar Bergman.
So that right there should be a seal of approval because Kubrick is still up there today, highly regarded. He's not one of those directors that's fallen to the wayside. But on that note, I think we should wrap this up.
So what are we going to watch next time?
What are we going to watch next time?
Oh, you get to
how
pick.
How about Polar, since that just came out? I think it was yesterday it came out? Or today?
Let me know. We can continue
that
this
new
series.
Mads Mikkelsen movie on Netflix. Well, we can watch that and talk about it, since who doesn't love Mads Mikkelsen?
People that are stupid.
Don't say that. You're going to offend someone. Don't say that.
No, but Mads... Wait, you still haven't seen the Hannibal TV show, have you?
No, I have not seen Hannibal.
And you've seen The Hunt, though, right?
Oh, no. Stop asking about movies I haven't seen, Chris. You need to wait for Kay to be here so you guys can talk about all these movies you've seen that I haven't. But next time we will watch Polar, because I know I want to watch that, and Kay wants to watch it, and you love Mads Mikkelsen, so clearly you want to watch it, and I'm sure plenty of people watching this would want to watch it, because, again, it's Mads Mikkelsen. It looks like a great action movie, and it's on Netflix, and people just binge Netflix like there's no tomorrow.
I'm one of those people.
I'm not.
You're not?
I'm not.
After you go home for work, you're just like, screw it.
Most of the time when I go home from work, I write, and then I end up falling asleep because I'm exhausted.
Yeah,
9 to 5, and then work out, and then write. But anyway, this was our first, what did we call it? Cinema Sideshow?
Cinema Sideshow.
Geek Tank's Cinema Sideshow,
And we
for lack
give
of a better name.
Wild Strawberries a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Let us know what you thought, because we were kind of fumbling our way through this. It's our first time. We will sort of get the routine down, I guess, as we go along.
And hopefully next time Kay will be with us, because it's always better with 3 people.
Yeah, and watch an Ingmar Bergman film, Kay, because I'm going to make you watch this at work now. I'm going to put it on, and I'm going to make you sit down and watch it while I make boxes. Anyway. This has been Geek Tank's Cinema Sideshow. As we said before, I'm Zia.
And I'm Chris Luciano.
And we will see you next time.